there is grifting that goes on with these books. If somebody's sitting on a lot of these books, they want to figure out a way to pump up the market so not only they could sell them for a profit, just to be able to sell them, period. Think about how many retailers created a retailer exclusive variant that might not have sold, and they're sitting on 3,000 copies of a book in their garage. That just devalues your product, and we talk about that a lot.
Hey guys, before we get into the show, we need to take a quick moment to shout out our sponsors. First up, Ultra Pro. Ultra Pro has the best protective materials for your card, gaming, or even comic book collecting needs. Here in their shop, they have all sorts of goodies like top loaders, bags and boards, and even UV protected holders. And the best part is, if you head over to their online store, ultrapro.com, and use my promo code SWAGGLE, which you'll see in the description, you'll be able to save 5% off on your next order. Again, that is ultrapro.com. Use promo code SWAGGLE to save 5%. This episode of Swagglecast is also sponsored by me. The pulp adventure continues with issues 2 and 3 of my comic series, Sanity, a noir detective story set in the Lovecraftian universe. The Kickstarter is now live and has already been successfully funded, so go check out the project and see if it's something that you want to consider backing today. Link in the description. And if you would like to get caught up on the journey, you can also pick up issue 1 at swagglehosscomics.com. That is swagglehosscomics.com. Thank you all so much for watching and for your continued support of the channel. Now, with all the sponsors out of the way, let us get on with the show. All right, Bryan McClay back on the YouTube channel. It's been too long, man. How's it going?
It's going good, man. Busy. Not as busy as you, but busy.
Well, I feel like you're always busy. I mean, one of the most sort of dedicated comic YouTubers out there in the game right now. You're always doing live shows. And, it's a pleasure to have you back on, this show, because I made this podcast so that I could have just good conversations with people that I find influential in the hobby, whether they're creators or retailers or whatever. And, I think that you are sort of uniquely qualified. At least this is how I view you. You uniquely qualified to this space in so much as I think you can put a voice to what is going on in comic book culture, maybe better than anyone out there. And so, if Marvel and DC is not knocking on your door to just sort of get your opinion on like, hey, what should we do next? Like, I feel like they're making a big mistake. So I love your show. I respect you so much, and so I'm happy that we get to have this conversation, man.
Hell yeah, dude. I appreciate that immensely. I feel the same way about you. You know that you've been killing it for a while, and you're a breath of fresh air and otherwise cold area of YouTube comicdom lately.
Oh so. Man, well. Yeah, this is why I have to have you on, because it's too PG over on my channel. We got to get into some drama topics and stuff, and get into that later on in the show. But before we get there, just the other day at the time of recording this, just yesterday, we had our CGC JSA announcement. I'd love to get your thoughts on this combination. I know you probably have opinions on JSA because you know the card world so well. Mm-hmm. But what was your initial thought when you heard that news?
Goodbye CBCS. That was my initial thought, man. 100% goodbye CBCS. At the same time, I had people calling me going, well, do you think that maybe CGC will buy CBCS? And I'm just like, I don't know what it is, but they got to figure out something, because this was always the game to CBCS was signatures verification. That was always what it was from get-go. You had a place that you could send your signed books. That was such a big problem. As a matter of fact, the other day I was going through boxes, looking to have a sale, and I'm pulling out books to send to CGC, filling up a short box, and then I realized I got to fill up another short box to send to CBCS, because I got a ton of signed books from cons and this and that I want graded. So I'm filling up stuff for CBCS. The news comes around. I was like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. I like all the jokes with people saying, I can't wait to see a James Spence authentication sticker on my comic book, because that's true in the card space. I remember when JSA first started, you would get a card that was autographed, and you'd look on the back, and there'd be this little sticker on the card. And you're like, what's going on? You put a sticker on my card. So, we'll see how that all plays out in the future with JSA, but I'm excited for it. I think that this was very smart on CGC's effort, because they needed a win badly.
Yeah.
Do you think that they were holding on to this, or do you think that this was something that maybe they were like, "We'll come back to it when we need it"? Because it was perfect timing.
It is perfect timing. I can't imagine it is something that they quickly put together, right? Because what I did a little video on it and quickly covered the news and went through the press release and stuff. And they already say like, oh, you're going to be able to do this as soon as April. So which to me is like, oh, well, that's integration into their website, like filling out the forms and stuff. That's integration into like all their processes and stuff. So if this was like a, hey, let's quickly get this together, I mean, they moved extremely fast. And I would have to
Yes.
imagine that this is something that they've been in talks with JSA for, I don't know, I mean, months, I would have to assume, so I think maybe it's just sort of a perfect timing for them to get a win. And it seems like a win because I don't know how it came across your social spheres, but I feel like everyone is super excited about it,
Oh,
which has
yeah.
not been the kind of the sentiment I've felt about CGC lately. Did you kind of get that sense too, that people are super excited?
Oh, big time. Other
Mm.
than the CGC haters, we know that there's a group of CGC haters that just, they're gonna hate on anything CGC does. But
Yeah.
see, you remember when the whole thing was going on with Glenn at Comic Book Palace and the whole Mark Millar thing, where Glenn was saying that the writers, they don't care about these characters, and it sparked this huge thing,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like that's kind of happening now with this.
Mhm.
It's gonna spark something in the grading sphere that hopefully will help. We'll see. But it kind of reminds me of that time when that was going on, where there's this stuff that's happening in the background of making comics bad. Well, we need to figure out something real quick to make it better,
Mhm.
and or at least for them. But the thing about that was so funny when they were talking, Mark Millar and Glenn, and this whole thing came up, and Mark had that panel of comic book owners,
Yeah.
and he asked them, what needs to happen, and one of the things that they said was the big two publishers need to be doing well. If the big two publishers aren't doing well, then it hurts all of comics. Well, I kind of feel that way for grading too. If CGC is doing bad, it hurts all of grading. So we need CGC to be that guarantee that their name states. We need that standard to be held very high. And if it isn't, all of grading, all of collectibles, because the grading has become so intertwined with collectibles that it's going to affect it. And because CGC is and their parent company is the biggest name in grading, bar none.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the CGC has so many roots into every industry, every business, the whole entire ecosystem of comics, like you said. And so if they're not trusted and their company's not doing well, I mean, like that drastically affects all the auction houses, that drastically affects online retailers who do, sell CGC comic books, that affects, comic book dealers in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think that, like we said, there's a big portion of the comic book community that is, a never slabber is kind of what I've called them. Like, just
Yeah.
nothing that they can do is ever going to make them, happy about slabs and everything. But
Mhm.
on the other hand of it, it's like there's still a need for them as a company. And at this point, they're so ingrained into the hobby that it's you can't pull this root, out without killing the plant, So I think, like you said, all you can sort of ask for and hope for is them to be as buttoned up as they can be, the transparency, like running a good business, like communication with the community so that they are letting us know, how they operate and stuff, which, I want to save this for later. We'll talk about some of that 99 video that they put out. And
Yeah.
even though people were kind of criticizing it, myself included, I'd rather they be in a place where they make videos like this and then we just understand like, hey, that's the game. So like you can choose, like if you don't like their game, you don't like how they do it, like just don't submit. But
Yes.
at least we
Yep.
know, that's
Yes.
what they do. And
Yeah.
it's up to them.
I think it's gonna really help the overall game, because there are a lot of people that want to get comic books graded that are signed that don't like CBCS for whatever reason. They just don't like the way it looks. Excuse me. I know that's one of the biggest things is that, you know CBCS doesn't look as good as a CGC. But
Yeah.
the most important thing is those sales data. That sales data it's a killer. And I know everybody was crying, oh, there's all these people that are CGC lovers that are gonna, always make excuses and this that. There's only one excuse for when it comes to most of the CGC argument, and that's the price point on resale. That's
100%.
it. I
Yeah.
mean,
No,
there's a very small group of graders that like to grade just because they want encapsulation.
yeah.
The rest have in part of their mind, and some of the reason that they're doing the CGC thing is because of resale value, period. That's it.
100%. 100%. And I mean, like, I do self-deprecating humor against myself because I say like, oh, this is Swagglecast the shill coming out, but I always just say, I mean, if you find a 9.8 AF-15, sure, you could sell it raw, but like you would be kind of a fool not to grade it
Yes.
and to maximize the value out of it. And that is the place where everyone is. And whether you hate CGC or not, like it's going to maximize the value. And that's when people use it. That's why the majority of people use it. And
Yes.
to your point about the money side, yeah, like if you could wave a magic wand and all of a sudden CBCS sold at the same price, like there probably would be a lot of people that's like, I'd rather just use them as a business. But at the end of the
Yep.
day, that's just not the market. And until that changes, which I don't know how you do it, I've thrown out ideas of like, I actually think it has to be a top-down thing, which you can't really affect this. Like all of a sudden, Heritage would have to treat CBCS equally. They'd
Yeah.
have to be a partnership with them. Pricing services like GPA would have to include CBCS sales data, so it's not like, oh, last 90 day is specifically CGC. You'd have to change like the big companies and stuff in order for normalizing of prices to start to take shape, and that's just not going to happen.
If that would happen, which I agree with you, that would have to be a big part of it. People would call fuckery in a second. They would say
Oh
that
yeah,
people are messing with the market and this and that. It's got to be organic if it's going to happen. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening. I mean, look at these. CGC made some major mistakes. I mean, they had probably 4 or 5 major mishaps where they tripped over themselves in a 4-month, 5-month maybe period. And they're still killing it on secondary sales. Most graders and pressers that I talk to, and I talk to a lot of them, specifically say that they only send to CGC for the majority of the pressing that they're doing on people. The majority of the grading they're doing, they're sending to CGC. And still, right now, even with all the problems that are going on, CGC is getting a ton of books because most people don't even care. They don't even know about the issues with CGC.
true. I've done that, like that calculation in my mind, or just DM people. I was like, what would you say the actual percentage of the comic book market or collecting market knows even about any of this? I'd be shocked if it was more than 20%.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
But
I agree.
it's very, very interesting. And with this JSA acquisition, like you already said, this was the last thing that sort of CBCS had over CGC.
Yeah.
And I want to get your opinion on this because people are talking about verification versus authentication, right? Which is like or witnessed versus authenticated, right?
Yeah.
So you're still going to have this little distinction where, okay, a CGC person was there and saw it happen versus like, hey, we're using JSA to do some analysis, whatever their processes are for authentication. I got a few questions for you on this, and I'd love to hear what you think. Number one, I was always under the understanding that CGC didn't authenticate signatures because I think that they just thought of it as a philosophy for their company, meaning like, hey, there's no real way for us to ever know that this is authentic
100%,
without
yeah.
seeing it ourselves. And therefore, that's just the position that we have. Now, I don't know if I made that up in my head that was actually their position, but do you kind of feel like that was
Yeah.
the case? And now that they're doing this, do you feel like they're kind of going against their thing because they just know that this is the next money frontier
Well,
for them?
I think yeah, 100% you're right. I agree that, they look at themselves as they used to have this high standard. Okay, we're this high standard of grading here at CGC. We're gonna make sure everything we grade is on the up and up, and all the signatures that we're grading is on the up and up. That has always been a thing in my mind too, for the reason that they don't do the signatures. But let's talk about what happened in the last 5 months again. There's been these major issues, and that have called out their standard, the integrity of the company, right? You have people coming in who are forging labels. You have people that are slipping books out, breaking the weld on the cases, slipping books in and out, and that puts all of that guarantee into question now. So I think that part of that was also like, well, it didn't really work. I mean, there's people that are getting away with not forging signatures, but not having a witness around. We've heard so many stories about the guarantee, the CGC witness signature authentication, where people are just taking stacks of books to an artist and just having them sign it with no witness being around, or they're the witness. They just signed up last week and they're the witness. There's so many times that happens, and it's being outed on a weekly basis now. It feels like that they kind of had to do that. They had to
Yeah.
say, we have to make this change,
Yeah.
because people are going to force the issue no matter what. In my opinion, they're going to do it. They're going to figure out a way to get around it.
Yeah. It's a funny thing. Like I can't say, I won't say too much, on air here, but I would say that, yeah, like from various people that I've talked to, the witness thing, can be done remote, and as long as if you, Brian, are like, oh, I'm a signator, or I can be a witness, as long as you sign the paper that says that I signed it, like, you're good. So
Yep.
you don't actually have to see me sign it. You just have to vouch for me, and yeah, say, think what you will, or imagine, some of the use cases that can be done with that, as long as it's on the honor system. So this was a thing that they were going to go into this space because it's probably ballooned too much, for them to not utilize, the opportunity that they have here. And, but at least on the flip side of it, at least from what I understand, people respect JSA. I mean, oh, well, you gave me a little bit of a look there. Okay. Unpack that for me, because I don't have much opinions on them, as far as like
Well,
who they are as a company.
yeah, they're the biggest authentication company. They're the CGC of authentication
Okay.
signatures. So, but just like any other company, there's been issues in the past. There
Right.
will always the larger the company gets, and the more money that is being made off that company, the more fuckery there's going to be. And it's so hard to not have any of that go
Mm.
on. And JSA has had their fair share of it. They come from the sports card. I mean, they don't come from the sports card world, but that's mainly where a lot of that the JSA authentication is used
Mm.
on sports merchandise. And if you guys think that there's fuckery going on in the comic book world, it doesn't hold. It's nothing compared to the card world and the sports
Right.
off sports signature world. I
Mhm.
mean, so many people have been forging signatures in the sports world forever. I mean, the famous story about Mickey Mantle's signature, where something like 50% of the Mickey Mantle signatures out there are fake. That's how bad it is in the sports world.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Last couple things with JSA before we move to something else. I'm very interested in sort of like the unintended consequences of things, like that
Mhm.
every time, something's implemented, there's always trade-offs. And one thing that I started thinking about is, now that you have this service available for CGC, I know there's a lot of comic book artists and writers that, if you want to get an autograph from them, uh, if it was for you, they might give it to you for free. They might only charge you $5 or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
one for free, right?
Yeah, one for free. But if it's like, hey, I want you to sign this and I'm sending it to CGC, like, maybe their price would be like, I don't know, 40 or 50 or $80, for
Mhm.
someone who's, really well known. Do you think that this opens it up to where artists are going to need to be a little more privy to this, that there's going to be people now that go, hey, yeah, sign 100 of my books and I'm not sending it to CGC. They're just for me. And
Yeah,
then now I'm just going to send those books to JSA and here we go.
of course. That was one of the weirder things that's happened, in my opinion, over the years in collecting comics is when you used to go to cons in the 90s and earlier, creators signing a book was nothing. And
Mm,
signing however many for free was nothing, right? I mean, it wasn't to the effect that it is now because so many people are making money off of it. But when the creators kind of caught on to that. And I remember the first time that I realized that it was necessary for them. I was at a con and I was getting a signature from Rob Liefeld on a New Mutants 98. And I remember when they found out the New Mutants 98 was the book, the price went up to some ungodly amount. And, then you see Rob started pricing for different types of signatures. And if you want a little balloon on it with Deadpool eyes, it costs more money. And I remember being really mad and then thinking to myself, well, how would I feel if these guys are making, thousands of dollars off of my name and my signature, and I'm not making any of that money? Now, it would be one thing if I was Rob Liefeld and I've made millions. Maybe I might think of it different. But if I'm an up and coming creator, that's a weird thing to be in because you don't want to charge somebody and push them away. But at the same time, these people are making a lot of money off of your signature and you might not be making that much money because we all know that's a big problem right now in the creator world is getting paid for the work they're doing for these publishers.
yeah.
So, it's a catch 22 in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's also probably like a weird situation for, like you said, certain artists. Like if you're, like a Peach Momoko who kind of blew up all of a sudden, right? And even before she probably understood her own worth.
Yeah.
Because for her, it's sort of like, she's probably at a certain point just happy that someone wants her signature. Like, hey, that's cool, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like you're pushing people over and New York
Yeah.
Comic Con
Fights.
things
Yeah.
signed. And so it probably happens very fast for them, and it's a touchy subject because artists are artists. They want to. They're just in it for the work. They don't want to be too greedy or anything, and they feel bad charging. Whenever you talk to artists, they always feel bad, selling
Yeah.
their pages and stuff. But yeah, I think that they're going to have to be aware of this more.
It's really sad. That's sad.
Yeah, it is a little bit sad. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when you have, 2 I know of 2, artists right now. I mean, it's not a hidden secret. You mentioned Peach Momoko. Souza Mike is another one that, doesn't like to be at these cons for whatever reason because of how people react and how people act, to be fans of theirs. And, you have people getting in fist fights. You have people, treating them weird, saying weird things to them, especially the female artists. That's another aspect that we don't really talk about in the comic world. That's very interesting. It's a fine line with these female artists because, comics and comic covers are very male oriented with the way women look and how they're being drawn, and I don't have any problem with that, trust me. But it's got to be weird for a female artist to be in that world and then have these people come up to them and cause issues. It's kind of like this weird thing, and
Yeah.
comic book collecting is male dominated too. So it's got to be weird for them to have people getting in fights, and that's going to push them away from wanting to go to these cons. It's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think everyone knows. We all understand the memes, like how many jokes about you if you can afford to go to San Diego Comic Con, you could afford to buy deodorant. It's like we know what it is. Like we're all
Yeah.
nerds in this space, so there's some socially awkward interactions with people out there and stuff. So this was also one of those things I talked about with the explosion of CGC signings, like in-house signings, or like places like Whatnot or eBay Live, where now you can just like get a remote signing from people. And I was like, this is great on one level, but on the other level, it's like, oh man, yeah, it really is kind of navigating away from the what would be the human interactions you would have, but this is kind of the world that we're moving to. So
Yeah, the live selling aspect is another crazy thing. I mean, at what point does all right, so if you work at CGC, one of the stipulations that we found out that not I don't think we found out, but came to light in a big way is that you can't sell collectibles, right? If you work for CGC and stuff like that. But at what point does CGC start doing live sales or these live signature signings on a live sale app? Oh, they're already doing them. They're
yeah,
already doing
100%.
them. You
Well,
know?
I did a thing where I looked at up like, okay, if you just go back to like CGC's Instagram, you know, you just scroll through and you go to like 2022, how many posts did they have that were announcing Todd McFarlane signing coming in May or whatever it
Yeah.
was, right? And you could just see like, okay, 2022 was a certain number, and then 2023 was like a lot of numbers, and then 2024 it's like there's a signing every week. So you know, I
Yeah, they
think
have a list,
yeah,
like
yeah,
a huge list of signings that are coming up. And it used to be all one or two names on it. Now there's like 15 names. And, shout out to all those artists that are making the extra money and stuff, but it also kind of starts causing people to question things or to look in things in a different
yeah.
way.
Do you think that the last question on the JSA thing? Do you think that the verified versus witnessed is going to be a thing? Price difference on secondary market? You know, it's going to be like, oh, well, this is a witnessed one, therefore it should be more expensive than a JSA
No,
one. You don't
no,
think
I
it's
don't.
going to?
Maybe in the beginning, maybe for a short period of time, but no, I don't think so. I think that the only way that could change is if comics. All right, so it wouldn't change the verified and the not verified witness, but what could change it is what happened in like the card world, where people would get signatures on cards, but it was kind of looked down at in the beginning. Before there was grading or authentication, people would always say you never get your card signed. It back in the 80s and before. If you got your card signed, it would bring the value down. It was always, if you're going to get a signature of a baseball star, you got it with a ballpoint pen on a sweet spot on a baseball. That was the best place to get it for resale value, right? Well, when the grading companies started coming and started authenticating this stuff, it changed. It changed drastically. So, and in the card world, that isn't really an issue where, the witness thing. And here's why: because a JSA has been there for that long. Now, there is a thing in the card world that I'm surprised the comic world hasn't got into yet, but that is where the printers, Topps or Panini, which are, the big card companies right now, would have players come in, or they would go to a player during spring training and have them sign the cards, and they would certify those cards because they're with them. A Topps associate is there having these people sign them, and then they would put them into packs. And then there was no question if you got a pack pulled card. For the longest time, it was no question about that signature. Well, years go by and we find out that, Dak Prescott is using an auto pen. Luka Doncic is having his mom sign it. There's these weird things, but there isn't this verified and not verified thing. If it's graded and the signature says it in PSA encapsulates that card, the signature is good. They won't encapsulate something without a signature.
Right.
Now, if CGC starts doing that, where they say, or sorry, they won't, the card grid PSA won't encapsulate a signature without it being real. They just get rid of it. Even if you said, I want you to encapsulate this, I don't think they will, because they don't want to put their name on the line. So I think that it'll come to a point where that won't matter. If as long as it's encapsulated, it'll be a thing. Now, here's the interesting thing: has CGC come out and said what they're going to do with label wise, how they're going to differentiate? No, I don't
No,
think
they
so.
have not said that yet. And I was wondering if it was going to be like as drastic as a different colored label to as like subtle as a witness versus authenticated on the little thing. But I would imagine that. Remember when the label notes used to have cover detached on it, and then they removed all that stuff, and it was like the big news for that week or whatever, and then now like kind of nobody even cares anymore.
Yeah.
But that came as change because they were getting feedback from dealers of like, it's already hard to sell this low grade, and if it says cover detached, I mean, that makes it even harder. So I would imagine this is
Oh,
going to go through a similar evolution where
yeah.
even if they
Oh,
put JSA on it, eventually it's just going to go away.
yeah.
And then you can look up on the greater notes. Oh, you'll find if it's witnessed or for JSA.
The problem is that they don't put greater notes on half the things that they put out, it
Yeah,
feels
that's
like.
true. So yeah,
So,
that's a whole other can of worms.
yeah.
Uh, well, let me switch gears a little bit to content creation. Here we
Mhm.
are, two YouTubers in the comic book space making comic book content. I can't believe it. I mean, you've been at this for 4 years. Have you been?
6, I would say. I've been went since whenever Flipside started.
Right.
So maybe it's been 5, 4 or 5. I don't know. It's been a long time. It's been a
Yeah,
long.
it's been a long time. It's like it's been long enough for me now. It's like about 3.5 years where it's like I feel like okay, now I've seen full waves of things come back around. But I want to get your thoughts on the content creation, call it influencer comic book space, and not even just in where we hang out a lot, in which
Mhm.
which I like to think is sort of vintage secondary market happenings. But even
Yeah.
in like Comicsgate world, all stuff going on. I had Eric July on this podcast, talking to him about his comic book and stuff. There always seems to be a lot of drama around comics. Content creation has become a whole machine around the comic industry. What's your general thoughts on where content connects with comics? Do you think it's been like a net positive or net negative for the industry as a whole?
I think during the pandemic, it was 100% a net positive. I
Hmm.
mean, I think that it helped push a lot of that big surge that we saw in collecting and comicdom and all that stuff. 100% during the pandemic, it was a net positive because people needed that, especially the type of content that we kind of create. Um, you do a lot of more one-on-one, or you just kind of doing, but you do a lot of roundtable discussion. 90% of the stuff that I like to do is roundtable discussion, and you got all these people coming on, and you see their faces, you see them talk, you see them on a regular basis. It becomes like a like they're your friends, right? I have, and this is the reason why I got into content creation. One of the main reasons is because I was a Joe Rogan fan. I think me and you have talked about this, and I would look at Joe and Joey Diaz and Ari Shafir. Like I looked at them like they were my friends because I was listening to them constantly or watching them constantly. And I think that's how a lot of people felt when the pandemic was going on, a lot of people just maybe weren't even buying comics at that time. They just maybe got into comic characters from the movie or something like that. And during the pandemic, it was great. It was awesome. I felt like, especially during that time, there was a lot more collaboration with other creators. But ever since maybe in the past, I would say the past 2 years, 3 years, ever since the pandemic, kind of everything started getting back to normal. Man, it's been very very negative atmosphere. And for the longest time, I thought that was just the comic world, which is very interesting. I didn't think too much outside of that. I thought, oh, this is just comics. There's a lot of 40-year-old, I call them 40-year-old babies in comics, that want to cry about everything. But man, I learned that this happens in all over the YouTube content creation sphere. There's a lot of jealousy and envy, unwarranted jealousy and envy in this game. And I think the biggest problem is that social media has caused us as humans to not understand social cues as we used to, as much as we used to. Like, reading social media text and looking at posts, and there's a lot of this where people think, oh, that person's talking about me. I had a
Mm.
blow up with a person that I considered a really good friend, even though we hadn't hung out personally or this and that. We met through comics and we content creation, and we were good. I consider him a really good friend, and this blow up happened where I would have to call him over and over and tell him, "Hey, man, what you think I'm saying, I'm talking trash about you has nothing to do with you, and I would never talk trash about you. I hold you in high regard. Don't ever think that if you see a post from me on IG that I'm like throwing little shade bombs at you because it's not. And I would have to do that over and over until it blew up in a way where it was just like, listen, man, we can't do this anymore. You're pushing too many of your friends away. And that type of thing has happened to the point where I'm calling like my best friend. I do a podcast with my best friend Keith, and I would call him and vent to him. I'd be like, "Hey man, is it me? Like, am I an asshole? Because I feel like I've had the same exact issue with that keeps coming. Is it me? It made me question me, and I had to be kind of told, no, it's not you. Like, I would have felt the same way, this and that. But I think that there's this weird envy and jealousy thing in this world that I don't know why it's there. I don't get it. It's
Yeah,
weird.
yeah. I mean, you're right. I 100% agree. Obviously, in even much bigger than comic books, the advent of social media and the negativity bias that we just have as humans, right? Where it's you have to watch like the craziest train wreck videos and things like that, and how the algorithms are built. So creating content around negativity gets so many more views than
Yes. Yeah.
positive videos and things like that. So we're kind of in this tailspin, I think, in terms of that as a society, especially here on YouTube and stuff. And then when you distill it just to comic books, kind of feels like that's the only news that really, really matters. And it's such a weird thing because I try not to fall into the trap of it myself, where I know that if I make a CGC video, where we like call them out for something, I know people are going to want to watch this, versus if
Yeah.
I say, here's my top 3 comic books I'm reading right now, like nobody cares about that. They
No.
just don't. And so I try to balance it out, but it's a hard thing to do. And where I'm going with this is I think you have a good segment on your show where you do the drama alert. And I think that people who maybe are not as like in tune to these types of conversations and content stuff, I think sometimes people get a misunderstanding of what it is that you're doing with it, where
Yes.
because on the one hand it's like, okay, we're gonna talk about CGC. So on the one hand, it's this, the cynical version could be like, oh well, Bryan, you're just trying to farm drama. But on the other hand, it's like, well, is this not important news to talk about that we should discuss and have a conversation about? So like, where's the balance there? But it does feel like, in this content world, even going into like the Comicsgate side of things. And I have to ask you about this whole like Ethan Van Sciver and Eric July, who I had on the channel here, and we had this conversation. Like, I still wonder if their thing is just fake.
Okay.
Like,
So
which maybe it is, but you can cook with that in a second. But I wonder if it's fake in order, again, to create the machine of hype and drama and all this sort of
yeah.
stuff.
So I started the drama alert segment for one reason and one reason only, because in this world, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and a lot of other content creators will know what I'm talking about. In this world, you get messages, direct messages from people anytime something happens drama wise. I will get clips sent to me of people talking trash, people thinking that they're talking trash about me or somebody I know. Like, those come my way so often, it's unreal. And I'm not saying don't stop, because that's the reason I created the drama alert segment. People are going to talk about this. People are going to want me to talk about this stuff no matter what. So the best way in my mind to talk about it was, all right, I'm a big fan of the internet world and the internet YouTube culture. And so I'm going to throw a little bit of a callback to my boy Killer Keemstar from the old school Halo days. And I'm going to do a drama alert segment. And I did a little riff off of his intro, his old school intro, and kind of his thing. And it felt good kind of showing him some love, because, that's old school internet lore. But at the same time, okay, now I can talk about this drama that everybody wants me to talk about. But here's the thing: 90% of the things, the points, or the stories that I bring up on the drama alert segment is so I can have a roundtable of people, with most of people have differing ideas somewhat. They're not all going to agree on something. Flesh it out.
Right.
And a perfect example of this is there was you remember the Spawn 306 NetherRealm
Yeah,
variant.
yeah.
Story comes out. We all know that story. It was crazy. It was, of course, on everybody's drama, segment that they do. And I remember there was a lot of shade being thrown at Comic Tom because he had done a story on it, years ago, and this and that. And I couldn't figure out. I had never seen the video he had done, and so I went, okay, I'm gonna go check this out, but I'm gonna do it live on the air during drama segment, and we're gonna flesh it out. So I did it on the air, and I said, hey, everybody's contacting me, telling me, oh, we need to hold Comic Tom accountable because for some reason he has something to do with this. So he had done a video on it back in, I think a year before all the news came out that it was overprinted and somebody had a bunch of copies. He had said, hey, this came up in a conversation with Nick at Key Collector, and it doesn't, and Nick kind of questioned how many copies are out there, and we need to look into this a little bit more. There might be a ton more copies out there than we think there is. And we watched that video live on the air, and it was very cool to be able to see, all right, before I start the video, the people on the round table are all, with, pitchforks in their hands, ready to go at Comic Tom. After the video and me saying, hey, let's take a look at this from a different standpoint, everybody's like, no, he's right. We should, give a round of applause to Tom, and we should all taken his advice earlier because he called this out years before.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of what the Drama Alert segment is about. Let's flesh this out and see as the community that we fostered here, in the channel, the internet, whatever, our little tent pole of comicdom. Let's figure out if this is warranted. And that's the reason why I do the Drama Alert segment. It makes it so I'm going to get people saying, oh, all you're doing is farm and drama. That's all you like to do. Well, you don't watch the segment, obviously, because you would realize that it's not just about the drama. It's figuring out if it's warranted and where do we go from here after it, if it is warranted.
Yeah.
That's the whole key.
I kind of feel like people react mostly to the thumbnail.
Mm.
And I don't think that people who aren't in YouTube kind of understand, maybe people who watch YouTube actually totally get this. Because even before I did YouTube, I knew what the game was. But a lot of times people make the thumbnail that is the opposite of their opinion because it's the juicy thing to do. So if I make a thumbnail on my YouTube that says comic books are dying, and then when you actually go into the video, I go, comic books are dying. That's what people are saying right now, but I'm going to tell you why they're not, right? So you do that thing, but then I think people see that and they see, oh, my thumbnail, and they say, oh, Swagglecast thinks comic books are dying. Like he only talks about comic books are dying. And so where I'm going with all this is I wonder if sometimes Tom gets kind of roped into things like, oh, he's got, his hot 10 list sales and he's got the NetherRealm Spawn book on there. Mm-hmm. So it kind of is like, oh, I'm perceiving him as pumping up this book, but actually he just is using the thumbnail and it's there. And then actually his actual opinion is calling out, like you said, that, this was overprinted and stuff. So I just think that that's kind of an element, to all this where, people react to sort of headlines and stuff and don't actually hear what people actually said. And, they get the short version and it's distilled down, and having the long form conversation, which, is what you do with your show, I think is really the way to, get through all of this, and so it's just an interesting space we live in with that. And I don't know if this is what entertainment and comic books have just sort of become now, especially even, outside of, say, this side of it, going back to, Nightcrawler is now, pregnant, right? Or whatever that recent story was, or, the
Mystique becoming the dad.
Yeah. Basically. Mystique is the dad, and then on the flip side of it, some of the Comicsgate stuff, which, in my opinion, is just the other side of the same coin in a lot of ways.
Well, the Comicsgate stuff is very interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. This is funny. My favorite one of my very favorite artists, even before Comicsgate happened, before I knew who he was Ethan Van Sciver. There are two storylines, or books in comics that I consider the greatest to me, and that's Kingdom Come, written by Mark Waid and drawn by Alex Ross, and the Jeff Johns, Ethan Van Sciver Green Lantern saga. Rebirth brought me back into comics in a way that I had been out of comics forever. Rebirth made me go to the comic store every week again when I hadn't been doing that for years. And I fell in love with Jeff Johns and Ethan Van Sciver because of that storyline, and the art was just amazing. The characters created. I've always been a fan of that, like, space opera, the cosmic stuff, and I fell in love with Ethan Van Sciver at the time, and I collect Ethan Van Sciver. I've always been a creator first person, where I collect creator firsts, and I've been doing that with Ethan Van Sciver for a long time. And the Comicsgate stuff happened back years ago, right after the whole Gamergate thing, and I knew about it. I knew Ethan was part of it. I had seen some of his stuff, but not a lot. And once you become a content creator, the funny thing that happens is you kind of quit watching a ton of content that you used to watch because you're making content, right?
Yeah.
And so I hadn't been watching a lot of the Comicsgate stuff, but I knew Ethan was a part of it, and I knew that there was some things that people were saying this and that. So it was a very interesting thing for me to get reestablished into that after all these years. And this weird thing happened. For those of you guys that don't know, I do a Hot 10 show every Friday called the House of Stein Hot 10 with my good friend Ben Steiniger and my buddy Richie and a couple of Yee Hood. We go over the top 10 comics that are sold on the secondary market every week. We have been doing it for almost 5.5 years, maybe 5 years now. Stein's been writing it for a long time. And one of the books that was on the list, we actually had it at the number one spot because it was selling for so much right out the gate, was a Comicsgate book. And it spurred this whole thing. And I brought Ethan and John Malin on my show. And it was the weirdest thing, Mickey. It was like the at the same time I'm being called a misogynist and a homophobe and a racist, I'm being called a snowflake and a social justice warrior from the other end. It
Yeah.
was so weird, dude. And I'm sure you went through kind of the same thing when you had Eric on, because Eric, is kind of in that world, especially at that time. It was, the break hadn't happened, and this weird thing happens where the haters and the fans and the haters both will come at you if Comicsgate stuff is brought up, and you're not a Comicsgater or a known Comicsgater. It's very weird. You're kind of eaten by these piranhas from both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely gotten all of it. I've gotten the, oh, your Swaggle Haas is hanging out with alt-right comics people. And then on the other hand, I've gotten it like, oh, Swaggle Haas is, California native. You got to watch out for his woke
Mhm.
politics and all that stuff. And then on the flip side, I'm a CGC shill and I'm a CGC hater. So I think it's yeah, like you can't really control, I think, what people get with that, but you do feel it, like when you go into those waters, you're like, oh, this is another liveliness of comments that I haven't seen, in other comic book conversations.
A lot. Here's the funniest part of all this. So when this happened, so many people were calling me a homophobe and a racist because I was supporting a homophobe and a racist and misogynist people. And I went, hold on. If people are calling these people this, I want to go in and I want to find out what they're talking about just to see it for myself. So I started watching Ethan's streams more. And the craziest thing happened. I find myself not seeing, for the most part, not seeing any of this stuff that they're calling him a racist for. What I was seeing was really dry humor, really sarcastic humor that me and my friends, and I think a lot of people that grew up in the 80s and the 90s, have that type of humor with their friends, that's what I see. I don't see any, for the most part, I didn't see any real hateful, angry comments. For the most part, it was, you know, really sarcastic humor. If there was hateful and angry comments, it was kind of like the same thing that we always see on YouTube. It was somebody taking shots at him or them, and him taking shots back. Where and now it feels justified. And I'm not going to tell somebody that, oh, it's not justified. You got to take it on the chin. No, we all feel a certain way when somebody takes a shot at us, especially as men. We kind of, there's this thing that happens where we instantly get angry and we instantly
Yeah.
want to fire back. So I would go and watch, these streams and these shows from them, and I find myself becoming more and more of a fan, liking it more and more. Now I don't agree with a lot of the politics and stuff over there, but I'm not saying that it's like hateful or anything. I just don't care about it. I think that the majority of the stuff that goes on those streams is hilarious, man. It is sarcastic, dry, very dark humor, and that's what I love. I've always been a stand-up comedy fan, and I think what happened in the social media world, especially in comedy and humor, is it killed it because you couldn't tell a joke in a comedy club without a video being taken of you and you being trying to cancel the next day.
Yeah.
The greatest thing that ever happened in the comedy world in the past, 10 years is where they're able to take people's cell phones and put it in a bag so people can't record, because then these guys can tell real jokes and real humor. And dark humor is some of the most important things in a human's life, especially when they're going through rough times. Dark humor can really help. Perfect example for me is my brother was going through bone cancer. Like I think it's been I don't know, it's been like 5 or 6 years at least now, and he was going through bone cancer, and it wasn't a good point. Nothing was working. He was going through really intensive chemo, and I remember going and hanging out with him. I would go hang out with him every day, and I would bring him. It's funny. I got a funny video of him holding a ton of Batman trades that I brought him, and just laughing his butt off
Mm.
because of dark humor and stuff, and that helped him so much. And anytime that we would get humorous during that time, it was dark. It was, for some reason, that it brings out dark humor in people when they're going through rough times. So when you can't have that humor, it causes a lot of problems. And I'll be honest, I think this whole thing of people being canceled because of jokes is a big issue in this world. And hopefully some point we'll get over that. I don't know if we can. I don't know if humans can,
Yeah.
get to that next level through
I
that.
think, I think it's gotten a little bit better, to be honest. But, I think we have an election later on this year, or I know we have an election later on this year. So, I think it's going to get crazy again,
Yeah.
which I'm not looking forward to.
No.
But I think, just putting a bow on that side of the comics world too, it's like YouTube's just a kind of a crazy space with social media, because you have these rooms where it's like, it's just like 5 people hanging out, but they're being watched by 1,000 people.
Yes.
So like, you kind of get into this weird, like, it's very intimate. Like, we're having this conversation and we're just talking and hanging with like your friends, or like you would in the comic shop, and you're just kind of busting each other's balls a lot. But you sometimes forget, like, oh, hey, there's a lot of people watching. You might say some stuff that you don't actually mean. Now, I don't know what their intentions are. I don't know about the racism accusations and things like that. But yeah, I think we just kind of live in a space where people are going to act the way they act, and then people hear what they hear, and it's definitely not for everybody on these fronts. And I've always been of the opinion where I want to have conversations and I want to cover topics that I find interesting. And I had Eric July here on the podcast, and I reached out to him because, for better or worse, whatever you want to think about Isom and stuff, this is historic comic book, news in a way, like to me. So it was like, I got a lot of flack and pushback for having him on my channel, but at the same time, it's like, first of all, he's way bigger than my channel, so I'm not like platforming him. I wouldn't call it that at all. But at the same time, like, this is important to talk
Yeah.
about. This independent
Well,
person just sold multi-million-dollar comic book IP. Like, that's pretty
and
crazy.
not only that, he sold, that much and opened it up to, I think, a world that maybe it wasn't normal in, right?
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, Eric July is a kind of like I looked at him as like one of those political YouTube talking heads type person, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't about comics. It was more about, what he was trying to say, not necessarily maybe politically, but socially,
Yeah.
like
And
he's
and
talking
he is that to some degree. And when we had the
about.
conversation, I think that he would admit if you asked him, it's like, by and large, the reason this comic is successful is because it is a purchase in opposition
Yes,
to, say, wokeness or whatever it is, right? I mean, I
yes,
think that that's true.
yeah,
So now if you buy it and you read it and people enjoy the story, then cool. Now you have a fan of the IP. But
yeah.
by and large, like, most people are buying it because it's a protest
What
too.
do you think what do you think about what's happened recently with this whole fracture in him and Ethan and the Comicsgate, world?
I just I don't know. I always start from a place of trust in terms of take people at their word and take people at face value, and until I have evidence to not do so. Um, so I would like to think that this is a legitimate, they just had some beef, and like you said, you say one thing and that turns to this, and they react to this, and then, like, guys, you just kind of it just kind of explodes into something to where now it's like a full on, civil war, in
I
there.
think
But
I think 100% this is YouTube.
but
And
yeah,
I'm not saying it's kayfabe. I think it is YouTube, the YouTube world. I think that the
well,
YouTube world fosters that envy and jealousy.
yeah. And taking an element out of wrestling, I mean, they work themselves into a shoot, maybe, right? Where it's like, it's one thing to take a couple pop shots and then somebody says something, a little too close to home, and then it becomes like, okay,
Well,
let me get stuff.
at the same time, right, this word grifter has been thrown around a lot lately in the YouTube
Yeah,
content creation world, you know what I mean? And, at the same time, people don't want a grifter showing up in their world, and Eric is being looked at as a grifter in a big way because of the fact that there's 2 things, I think. 1, the comic is not good. It's not only not good written wise, it's not good drawn wise, and that is a big deal. And not only is it not good drawn wise, it's using 3D assets that anyone can use on the internet, and it feels almost like I'm not saying he's stealing art or he's being a content thief, but it feels that way. It feels like this kind of the same way if an artist used AI art and said that he drew it, right? That's
right,
kind of how it feels. And I know Eric didn't draw the book. I know Eric, did, but still, he's overall. He knows. Oh, he's calling the shots there. So he had to okay that at some point. I mean, I don't know how he didn't, but and then the second thing is he can't take constructive criticism, right? That's a
mm,
big deal in a world like comics, especially in a world where you need your peers to kind of look over stuff and say if it's good or not. And he couldn't do that, especially coming from Ethan. It was, and it should be the vice versa. Like if an artist who has been an artist, a top artist in comics for as long as Ethan has, and done the things he has done in the comic world, tells me that, hey, this part isn't so good, maybe you need to take a look at it, I'm going to listen. I'm not going to be like, you don't know what you're talking about, and cause a big issue. And I think that's what happened. Eric, and I don't know for sure, I don't know these guys, but I think Eric kind of looked at it like, I'm bigger than you. I'm a bigger dog in this content world, in this YouTube world, and I'm not gonna. And it just, again, there's that jealousy, envy thing that kind of pops up in the YouTube world. It's very interesting, man, how it
yeah.
happens.
Well, I would say that, from my perspective, if Eric kind of built his platform off of criticism towards the current comic book industry, right? So when you do that, you have every right, of course, to say what you think about things. But when you do that and then you come out with your book, it's like, all right, well, now you were very harsh on other people's creative material. So you set yourself up to be judged,
Yes.
on your stuff as well. And you were judged. And then on the flip side of that, I think the fact that he was criticized on it, well, it's like it's hard now because it's like it's become such a big IP success story property. It's like he's got to now really protect this brand as like,
Yeah.
oh, this is way better than Marvel. So
Yeah.
you can't be having criticism. So you know what I mean? So
I'm a much smaller brand, and I understand that, but one of the biggest things that I kind of push, and I talk about this all the time on my shows. I tell viewers and friends of the channel that, hey, I want constructive criticism. If there's anything that I can do better, if there's something that I'm not doing good, please tell me. I want to know. And Eric, coming from the internet world, I don't understand why he's poking at the bull. You know what I mean? Because he, there's certain things in the internet world that are rules, and one of those rules is that you're gonna take criticism. You're gonna have people make fun of you. You're gonna have people, try to get at you. And the second you let them get at you, it becomes this. All right, we see the crack in the shell. We know where we're gonna go after him, and he let a lot of that in. He showed cracks in his armor, multiple cracks in his armor. And then when people came at him, instead of him realizing, okay, this is the internet, he fought it. Now, there's one thing I think that should be fought when it comes to YouTube and the YouTube world, and that is content, being a content thief. And people steal content all the time. There's people calling out people for stealing content all the time. So it doesn't it isn't always happening, but when it does happen, that's one of the things that should be called out. The rest of it, you're going to you're going to be made fun of on, the amount of times that people call me fat or call me a stoner, a silly stoner, it's abundant. And I could care less, you know what I mean? Because I know it's the internet. One, two, I'm at an age where I don't give a shit about those things anymore. I'm fat, of course. Yeah, I am. I'm 100 pounds overweight. Of course, I want to get rid of that. You're a silly stoner. Yeah, I love cannabis. Of course, I do. There's ways to kind of just let the armor kind of take that blow, and at the same time, you can't feed into that. Now,
yeah,
the content thief stuff is very interesting because in YouTube, there's always been two things. There's been that content thief thing and falsely striking videos. Those are like the two rules on YouTube that you just don't do. But everything else, you have to take it with a grain of salt,
yeah,
multiple grains of salt.
yeah. Yeah, I'm small potatoes for sure, but I've found myself on other channels' thumbnails before, so I'm like, all right, here we go, But at the same time, you just got to let it happen,
Yep.
it's totally okay.
Yep.
Speaking of stolen content stuff, I want to get your thoughts on a couple other topics. This is a good little segue with the drama report. You did a show with a couple retailers recently that were talking about art books and kind of the meta of. I want to lump it all together. Art books, we'll call them cosplay variants, and let's lump in as well, I guess, sort of the retailer game, online retailer game, and things like that. You don't have to summarize the whole thing, but let me ask you this: we're in a place where a lot of these variants are being made. There's a lot of companies coming up that have this business model of like, let me get, put it together an art book and create a variant and sell that. Or let me quickly use another IP and do a cosplay variant and get something together so I can sell that. What do you kind of make of these sort of, what do you call them? Like business models and stuff. I'll straw man the argument against them that these are sort of, cash grabs, sold as, quick money or quick way to get, people to get FOMO on some stuff. But on the other hand, like, people can create stuff. That's great.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
hey, you can make a variant cover. That's awesome. What's your kind of thought on this? And do you feel like, does it hurt the industry at all that to know that, hey, maybe it's more profitable to not make a comic book and actually just make a variant?
Mhm.
What's your kind of thought on that whole space?
Yeah. Okay, so I find this very interesting. This is one of the main reasons why I started that new show. I started a new show, I call it The Industry of Comics, where I have two great co-hosts that are longtime industry guys, LCS owners. You know, they've been in the game for 20 plus years, both of them, and in Jesse James Comics and Wonder World Comics, Dennis Barger. The show basically is to talk about those things that happen in the industry that we might not understand as collectors. And there is a big difference in how collectors look at this and industry people look at this. Now, as a collector and a collector mindset, I have that mindset of like, yeah, let anybody create what they want. They're creating it. That's a good thing. It's going to help the industry. Anytime somebody has a reason to sell a comic book or make somebody buy a comic book, it's a good thing. But it's this perfect storm that's kind of happened with retailer variants, retailer exclusive variants, and the art book.
Yeah.
And we brought up the word grifter earlier. I brought up the word grifter earlier, and I hate to say it, but I am becoming more and more attuned to the fact that this is how grifters get into the temple. My co-host Dennis Barger likes to say that, this is where, you got to start flipping those tables,
Right.
and I didn't understand it for the longest time until I talked to some of these industry people. We had Brian Polito on the other night, and we asked Brian Polito about the same thing, and he gave such a great answer. And basically, if you guys don't know, Brian Polito created a character called Lady Death, and it is a huge character in comics. He also created a character called Evil Ernie. Now, Brian lost the rights to Evil Ernie in a big bankruptcy thing, and there's this whole drama behind it. So he knows what it's like to lose an IP that he's created. He's not going to let anybody mess with another IP he's created, right? A retailer out there, if you guys don't know, her name is Melinda's Comics. She kind of creates these retailer variants. I don't know if she sells or has any other comic shop, or if she sells back issues or anything. I think she just does these retailer variants. And most of the time, they're not with the big publishers. They're kind of like these art books that are coming out.
And wait,
And
before you go on, we should really quick, in case people don't know, we should quickly just frame the cosplay variant and the art book are not necessarily comic books. On the interior pages of the art book, it's like, imagine a comic book cover, and then it's like a bunch of just your own art that you can just flip
yeah,
through, that's
just
inside.
like silly things that they put. There's not a story in there. There's not sequential storytelling. There's no storytelling. It's just a reason for them to sell a cover,
Right,
basically.
right. But comic book shape presented as a comic book.
Yeah, and what will happen usually is they'll go from con to con, or they'll sell it online, and they'll use a convention as a reason to maybe make a new cover, but have the same interior pages that really have nothing in them. For the most part, they could be blank because most people aren't even opening up the quote unquote comic.
Right.
They're just buying it for the cover. And so
Okay. I
Melinda
apologize.
did,
Carry on with Melinda's comics.
yeah. So Melinda did a cosplay variant. And also, to explain cosplay variants aren't usually, they have cosplay variants where it's an actual cosplayer and it's a photo of the cosplayer kind of dressed up as that. Those are real cosplayer variants. There's also a term cosplay variants for these books where they don't own the IP, but they're drawing the character and they're calling it a cosplay variant to get away in the legalities of stealing somebody's IP. So Melinda creates this cover, and it's a Lady Death looking character, and she's calling it a cosplay variant. Within, I would probably say, hours, somebody let Brian Polito know. Bryan stopped it in its tracks. Now, we don't know what he said to her, how he reached out to her. Basically, I think he probably had a lawyer send a cease and desist letter, and maybe said we're not playing around. And Melinda was smart, and she said, "Okay, I messed up. I apologize," and backed off. Now, we know why, because Bryan not going to let anybody take his brand and use it in a way that he doesn't have a say in. And that's a very important thing, especially if this brand you have created and cultivated over years, 20 years, he's cultivated this brand. He doesn't want somebody coming in and doing and making booby variants that he doesn't agree with, or making, sales off of his character. He wants to have the say. And I understand that, especially coming from the creator. But it's very interesting how the cosplay variant has gotten bigger over the years. There are so many IP infringing, content theft cosplay variants out there that I never really saw in that light until I talked about it to industry people. That's a big deal. And there's people doing Mickey Mouse, Disney cosplay variants, Star Wars cosplay variants, Marvel and DC cosplay variants, and I'm very surprised they get away with it. I don't understand how. I mean, just the other night during a show, we're talking about New Comic Book Day, and we're going all over the new comics that are coming out. And there is a cosplay variant book that came out this week that must have 15 covers of different IP infringing theft, characters. Very obvious. It's one thing to have a character drawn that might kind of have like Rogue's, hair, piece that's kind of the white hair on and you kind of think of Rogue, or maybe she kind of has a green and yellow outfit and the hair and it makes you think of Rogue. But if you put anything X on that, or a big X-Men logo in the background, and it's just kind of out of the way so you can't tell it's all X-Men, or if you put a X-Men bad guy in the background, it's too similar to me to get away with that. It feels like they're just poking the bull. They're poking the bear. They're waiting for the money. It must be so good. And that's the other thing. People are spending money on these things.
Yeah.
People, Ben Steiniger, who does the House of Stein Hot 10, tells me all the time, if booby books and cosplay variants were in his criteria for the Hot 10 list, they would be the Hot 10 books every week, because they sell.
Yeah.
And that's why people still doing it. Until people start speaking with their pocketbook, or going after somebody else's pocketbook and infringing on their IP, it won't change.
Yeah.
And I look at it now as people grifting. Now, a perfect example is this. I'll do a little YouTube. Come see it on my next show on Saturday night coming up. If you guys don't know, I do a Saturday night show live at 10 p.m. Eastern on my channel called Modern Comic Mayhem. This is where I usually have my drama comic alert thing. We're going to be doing a drama alert this week on another grifter that is basically taking IP characters, stealing art from the internet, putting it through a quick AI filter to change it up just a little bit, and putting it on a comic and saying, hey, we're going to have these at WonderCon. Now, that's the type of thing that drives me crazy, because they're just taking people's money, and these people think that some of these books have worth. I know that not every comic book collector is buying something because they think it has, worth. But these days, in the past 10 years, the majority of people who are buying comics have it in their head somewhere that, hey, they might be able to sell this thing for more than they bought it for.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem when it comes to these books, because these books are worthless, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's sad.
It's interesting. I mean, again, you had such a great conversation between the two guys who do the various types of these things, and it's to me, what I think is so interesting. Like, I'm of two minds. Like, on the one hand, I think, hey, it's capitalism. you want to have a business that takes a lot of work. You want to make a product. Nothing wrong with making a product and selling it to people. And if people like it and they want to buy it, great. But and this isn't necessarily their fault. I guess where I get a little worried about it is that if it's so much more efficient and easy to get a cosplay variant cover and slap together an art book really quick than it is to actually tell a story and make a comic book, like, it only makes sense that people are going to go to the path of least resistance
Yep.
and people are going to chase those things. Even artists themselves. I mean, how many
Yes.
artists today would rather just do variant covers than do sequential art? So many.
Scotty Young, J.
Yeah,
Scott
all of them.
Campbell,
Like,
Granov.
because it's
Yeah.
just so much more efficient for them to do it. And then soon, maybe they'll be the ones that be like, hey, you know what? I should just make art books with cosplay
Yeah.
variant covers and things like that. And ultimately, I think it just leads to sort of a worse state of the industry. Now,
Yes.
I can't say that it's anyone's fault. I can't necessarily say that they shouldn't be doing this because, hey, like, if that's their business or whatever, I think it's like a little bit of like a black pill, you have to sort of take, where it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is where it's going.
Well, I part of it, I do put blame partly on the big publishers.
Mm,
Not because they're not going after these people, because they're not writing good stories. They're not creating good comics, right? If the interior, okay, here's a perfect example. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I got into comic books and I spent all my days at the local comic shop and this and that, the book to have, there was 2 books to have at that time, where if you didn't have these books, you weren't, or if you weren't trying to get these books, you weren't a real comic collector, or you weren't a real comic fan. It was, of course, Amazing Spider-Man 300, but even more importantly and more coveted than the first appearance of Venom, it was Daredevil 158. Now, for those of you guys that don't know, Daredevil 158 isn't a huge key when it comes to a character or a storyline. It is a wanted book because it's the first time that Frank Miller took over the and started doing Daredevil, right? I don't think he was writing it. I think he was drawing it at that time. But Frank Miller went on to change the comic world because of his Daredevil stuff. So everybody wanted the first time Frank Miller did Daredevil in the Daredevil series, right? 158 was such a high valued book. It was that grail. 158 now isn't even thought of in that category.
yeah.
Like, the only people that really think about that book are creator fans, And the reason is, in my opinion, is because the writing game has taken a back seat to the art in even a bigger way. I think the art has always been the top dog when it comes to comics. It's always been about the art for the most part. But writing propelled it into the mainstream with stories from Frank Miller, Alan Moore, Mark Waid, you know, Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, Swamp Thing, Daredevil. All those series were important because of the writing, the
Yeah. Yeah.
story that it told. And it changed and made comics change from a kid's book to adults reading it. There's no comic, there's sorry, I shouldn't say that. For the most part, the vast majority of comics created to these days aren't for kids. And kids are not reading comics. Uh, that's obvious. So I feel like if the big publishers were paying more attention to what the stories and making sure that good writers were writing comics, we wouldn't have so much emphasis on art books or variant covers, right? Variant covers dominate the industry right now. If
Yeah. Yeah.
if it weren't for variants, comics might be dead. I feel like variants kind of brought it back in this big way, and it saved a lot of publishers. But if that wasn't going on, what would we be talking about? There's very few books that we talk about because of the story. It's
Yeah.
always about, oh, did you this cover is hot, this book is hot because of the cover. That's why. And that's the publisher's fault, in my opinion. I mean, a perfect example of that, I don't mean to drag on too long, but a perfect example of that is going on right now is, you have uh people writing storylines. A perfect example is Spider-Punk. The writer of Spider-Punk has no idea about the punk aesthetic, where punk comes from, what punk music is about, and they're having them write a character that is intertwined and part of punk world. Spider Punk, that's his name. And it's so hard to read because of that. People won't buy the book. The only reason to buy that book is because of a good-looking cover, and I don't think that this guy would have had a chance on a second volume if the covers weren't so good, because
Mhm.
it's that bad of a story. Now, it hasn't gotten to the point where a story is pushing people away, for the most part, but it's going it I'm surprised it hasn't, you know?
Yeah, it's really a shame, with where things are. I've had so many criticisms about Marvel and DC, and especially for me, like, doing my own book and doing my own Kickstarter and stuff, like, uh, creating marketing materials, creating trailers. I'm like, it doesn't take like, I mean, if I can do it all by myself, like, surely their marketing department could do a much better job
Yes.
promoting the stories and delivering messages as to like why you should be reading Doctor Strange. Does anyone have any idea what's happening in Doctor Strange right now? No. Like, and that's their fault. Like, you should know, because maybe I want to read it. Maybe it's great. I have no idea, and they're just not doing a good job promoting what's happening in the comic books. And I don't know, like, if it's, I don't know if they're embarrassed about it. I don't know if they care. I think, like you said, Path of Least Resistance, probably just easier to sell the variant covers.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's really a shame. And you're never going to get anyone emotionally attached and therefore create that true secondary market value to comic books unless they're invested in the story. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things too that you have to consider. When these comic books come out, yes, the cover is hot and people can chase the covers and stuff, but like, they got to be invested in the pages. Otherwise, that book is never going to maintain value over time,
Yeah.
which is
Yep.
unfortunate.
And another thing I think that's such a big problem that's causing this is, and we talked about it earlier a little bit, we kind of keyed in on it, is that these artists and these creators, they're not, I mean, for the most part, they're not getting paid
No.
um, a wage that's worth putting up with what they put up with. I think that's why there's so many of the big writers that don't write for the big publishers anymore. They look at it like, if I'm going to spend all this time creating something, I'm not going to create it to just give to Marvel or give to DC and not make any money off of it. Mark Millar said that that writers will make more money off of optioning one of their IPs than they would making all year writing a monthly book from a publisher.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And there's so many. The other thing is unfortunately they're also competing. There's so many more avenues for writers to go work. I mean, I write for a lot of video games, and like, maybe if I was born in the '70s or I was born in the '60s and I came up, like, maybe there was a multiverse version of me that would have gone into comic book writing, right? Because
Yeah.
that would have been the path. But like, I think a
What
lot
are
of
you
writers
talking
now.
What do you talk There's no need for multiverse. I mean, sanity's out there, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know what I mean? I think that there's career paths for writers that exist today that didn't exist maybe in the heyday of comic books, and they're definitely not doing what they need to do to attract people to work in those fields.
Well, a perfect example is, I brought up Jeff Johns. Jeff Johns is my favorite comic writer. And Jeff Johns, I mean, he was heading DC for the longest time. Uh, and he left to go run an imprint on Image Comics
Right.
because he can do what he wants over there. He doesn't have to worry about somebody telling him how to write a character that they have no idea what the character is. I think that's the biggest thing. I think that's why that word grifter is really moving around the
Yeah.
comics world lately, because for the most part, people that are running these companies or writing these characters, they don't know anything about the character or the community that loves that character. Taika Waititi says that he didn't even read a Thor book before doing the Thor movies, and that's that angers me as a comic fan. That angers me. If I was a Thor fan, that would make me so mad that, hey, you're not even going to go look at the backstory of this character and why this character is so beloved, and find out before making a movie about it. Like, what is your deal? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely one that if I was his PR person, I would have been like, he probably shouldn't have said that one, you know. But let me transition to kind of the last topic. Let's finish this out, going a little bit back to secondary market comic book stuff. I just wanted to quickly ask you about the House of Stein list. Of course, you mentioned that you do a hot list. You've been doing it every week for 5 years now. Definitely go check out the show, guys, if you don't know about it. But I wanted to get your thoughts on hot lists in general today. The idea of the hot list, and I guess maybe where I'm thinking about it is, on the one hand, you could make the argument that hot lists are the problem. They create the FOMO, and they're the cash grabs. But on the other hand, it's also, again, that thing of like, well, it's just reporting the news of
Yes.
it. And for me, I just find it interesting. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, these comics are moving. Oh, why is that?
Yeah.
What's your just general feeling on hot lists and maybe the allergy that people have towards them, or what they do for the hobby? Are they a good thing? Are they a bad thing? Are they the problem? What's your thought?
So, man, this is a great topic. We could do a whole show on this alone.
Yeah, I know we could. Yeah.
I it's funny the way that the hot lists are looked at these days, and I totally get it. I understand it. There are ways to do these lists, and there are grifters out there when it comes to this too, in a big way. The thing about Stein, and the reason why I still do the show with Stein and I push that show so much and I love it so much, is Stein is doing exactly that. He's looking at the sales on these books, whether they're correlated from cover price or just looking on eBay and Terapeak or Heritage. And not only is he looking at the sales, he's also gauging like the hotness and the popularity and how people are talking about the book. But the sales data is the most. For example, if you see a book on the list more than 1 week, it's because that book is selling for more on the secondary market than it did the week that we had it on the list the first time. If that book isn't selling for more than when we had it on the list the last time, it's not going to be back on the list. That's an important thing, because there's an easy way to grift in the hot list world. I know a lot of people bring up Key Collector, right? Because they say, oh, if Key Collector puts out a notice saying, oh, this is a hot key, everybody's going to go for that book. And I understand that. But here is the most important thing about the House of Stein and the House of Stein Hot 10 list and the House of Stein Hot 10 show. If you watch it, there's no way that you're going to come out of that thinking that Ben Steiniger is a grifting or trying to pump and dump something, because for the most part, the books that he talks about and puts on the list, he's telling people, don't buy that book. This book is nothing but FOMO. This book isn't going to be worth anything near this in 2 weeks. If you are buying this book to sell, you need to sell it now, because if you don't, it's not going to be worth anything in 2 weeks. Like, that is a very important thing about the book, honesty, right? You said it too. Why is this book selling? I don't understand why this book is selling. For the most part, not for the most part, but a lot of times we don't understand why the book is selling. We got to ask the chat. Hey, does anybody know, was this optioned? Did another YouTube channel talk about this book recently? That type of thing, and that happens. That happens a lot. But we're kind of telling people, hey, if you have this book, sell it now. And one of the things that we always say is, if you see a book in any of the 10 spots, you want to sell that book now, because it's probably hotter than it's ever going to be again. And these books drop in values so fast nowadays for whatever reason. I think you, for the most part, on new books, you have a 2 week window if you want to flip that book. And that's kind of where I come from in this whole content creation thing. It all started because of comic book speculation and being able to go to the comic book store on Wednesday, know that if you pick up a couple of, if you're lucky enough to get a couple of these new books, you could sell two of your books to pay for your box that week. You know what I mean? Or you could sell 3 books to get a grail book that you've always looked for. That is where this list comes from. It doesn't come from any other place other than that. And I think that's the important thing. I think that's why the House of Stein list has always been so great. Now, here's the other thing. This is the funniest part about it. The House of Stein list is where all the other lists that people talk about come from. It all originates from the House of Stein, in my opinion. Comic Tom got his start reporting the House of Stein list. That's how Comic Tom got started. He had like 600 subs before he started reporting the House of Stein list. He starts reporting the House of Stein list. He gets 10,000 subs, right? For whatever reason, if you guys want to find all the backstory behind all that drama, there's places to find it, but that kind of fell out, and Tom started doing the key collector list. Okay, so there's Tom's list. We know Tom's got to start with Stein. The Lords of the Long Box. I love TiVo and Lords of the Long Box. They report on the list from Cover Price, and I'm a big fan of Cover Price. Matt DeVoe is a good friend. I have a ton of respect for him. Where does Matt DeVoe come from? He comes from the CBSI community with House of Stein, right? And kind of that world where that list pushed a lot of that community. And of course, I talk about content thieves all the time. Renovision, the biggest content thieves in the game, basically stole all of their ideas from the House of Stein list. So all these big House of Stein or these Hot 10 shows that everybody talks about, I can't really think of any other that maybe some people might talk about. But
Yeah.
for the most part, those all lists, they all originate from Ben Steiniger and the House of Stein list. So that is an important thing to me when I talk about Steiniger. There is grifting that goes on with these books. You know what I mean? Like, if somebody's sitting on, a perfect example is if somebody's sitting on a lot of these books, they want to figure out a way to pump up the market so not only they could sell them for a profit, just to be able to sell them, period. Think about how many retailers created a retailer exclusive variant that might not have sold, and they're sitting on 3,000 copies of a book in their garage. And that's a big deal. And we talk about that a lot on this show, on the Hot 10 show. What's going on here? Why is this book hot? Why is this book dropping? We talk about books that have dropped. We have a buy the dip section that we start the show with, where we talk about books that might have been on the list a year ago that were selling for 2-3 grand, and now you can get them for less than the cost of grading.
Yeah.
That's the important thing. If you catch a hint of people not doing that type of thing where they're telling you, hey, these books aren't worth anything anymore, then I might think, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on this. But it's so obvious to me. Obviously, it should be. I work with them, but it's obvious that Stein isn't trying to pump anything. The guy's got a day job. The comics are not his job. It's a passion, a love for him. And to be honest, I don't know if he would be doing the Hot 10 list still, to this day, if he just hadn't been doing it for so long and people who love it so much. If people didn't come, if we didn't have, 200 people show up every Friday night with us at 11 p.m. Eastern to watch it, which is crazy to me, I don't know if Stein would still be doing it. It's the love of the people that love the list that causes Stein. And putting out a Hot 10 list, let me tell you guys, it's not easy. For the first time ever, last 2-3 weeks ago, Stein he was going to hang out. His daughter was going to college and he wanted to go see the game or something, and he couldn't write the list that week. So he asked me and Richie to write the list. And I've been doing the list 5 years with Stein, and I have never, ever talked about a book that he should put on the list or even hinted about putting a book on the list. I'm the guy that creates the show. I'm the guy that, hosts it. I'm not worrying about that. That's his thing. It was hard. I mean, it was really hard. And the list wasn't as good as when Stein writes it. It was obvious. So I tip my hat to the guy every week, man. That's a hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do. But I understand where people are coming from on that end.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, 100% I agree with you. I mean, the fact that he's been able to maintain the list as long as he has is a feat unto itself. But yeah, I think people need to understand that the list should just be information, right?
Yes.
It's like, okay, cool. That's what's going on right now. And whatever you want to use that information for, in your own collecting journey, then that's up to you to decide, right? Like, yes, you should not be buying anything off of a hot list that is being sold as like, get it now before you can never afford it again. Like that's not quite what the hot lists in comic books end up doing. And so I think, yeah, it's maybe people forget that you guys try to add commentary to it, and you're just trying to explain and just frame, okay, why are these things hot? And yeah, there's, like you said, there's a lot of grifting out there. There's always been grifting. You go back to the Wizard magazine days and things like that. There's always people trying to sell stuff. I had a guy on this show, Sean from Reserved Investments. We talked about even some of the shady stuff that can happen in anytime you hear about private sales of big expensive collectibles. You should always be weary of that, because why do people want you to know that a private Superman 1 sold for $5 million and exchanged hands? Like, why would they want you to know that? So all very interesting stuff. And, it's the Wild West of collectibles and comic books. And so, with the hot lists, I just look at them as information. And I think that they, in a lot of ways, I don't think they give enough credit in keeping sort of the life of the industry alive. I think people like kind of look at it as like like whatever, you're just trying to get FOMO or whatever. But it's like, hey guys, this is like, we're in the secondary world, right? Don't you want to know what's happening in the secondary world? It kind of keeps everything like gives it a little bit of a pulse, and I think that stuff is important and fun. And I think it's good for the hobby overall. So, I'm
one of the other things that a big deal about that is, and what you're saying is that the lifeblood, right? And that lifeblood of the hobby is, to me, is telling people new things that they might not know about. I talk about CBSI a lot back in the old days when to me CBSI was, amazing. It's a joke now, but back when it first started, 8-9 years ago, it started and got big. It's as a Google Plus message board group, right? And the reason why I think it got so big is because for the most part, the posts were showing like pickups somebody got at a garage sale or a flea market that week, and people would go, "Well, why is that book hot? Well, what is that book, and why is it so hot? Why is it such a big deal?" And that information, telling people new things about books they've never heard of, or showing them an artist they've never heard of, or showing them a cover that they've never heard of, or a backstory about a book being why it's rare, is the important thing. And that's what brings in a lot of new people, is that information. And that's why it's so important to me that the Hot 10 show has the Almost 10 and Buy the Dip. We have books that we talk about. And I think that for the most part, a lot of viewers really love those things the most. They could care less about the Hot 10, the main 10, but the other books that we talk about and that we saw that week that sold on the secondary market, maybe 1 or 2 sales, but we were like, why is this book selling, or what is going on here? These rare things that people have not known about is what pushes people, and what makes people go, what is that, and why is it selling, or why did it sell for that much, or that type of thing. That is the key, and that's why I love doing that show and that list so much.
Yeah, well, it's a great show. I'm definitely a big fan, and I hope that you guys continue to do it, because I think it's an important list to keep going for our hobby. But Bryan, I've taken up a bunch of your time. I probably could talk to you for like 15 hours. To be honest, there's so many other topics that I haven't even scratched the surface with. But I'm glad that I've been able to take this time with you and have you on the show. Maybe I can have you back. I think it's great to have someone so in tune to comics to be able to just shoot the shit with.
I'm always down. And listen, San Diego, man, you going to I hope you're going to go this year, because that's I love San Diego. I love hanging out with you and seeing you in San Diego, man. So I'm really looking forward to that this year.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's going to be
anytime you
fun.
want.
Yeah, I'll definitely be there. I'll definitely be there. But in case people don't know about you and where they can find you, maybe you can let the people know, how they can stay in tune to everything you got going on.
The easiest thing, if you want to find me, you can find me on IG. My name is right there. That's my IG name at Bryan McClay, and then you can find my link tree there, or you can just look my link tree up. It's linktree/Bryan McClay, I think. But I do Beyond Wednesdays on YouTube is my channel. We go live Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday nights, and then on Friday nights you can find me over at the House of Stein doing the Hot 10 list. And yeah, if you run into me at a comic shop or a convention, say hello.
All right, Brian. Well, thanks again for hopping on the channel, and hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll see you on the next one.